Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you can find stuff possibly unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group and very friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Hello again, and welcome back. We continue the story of me and my brother Ron's early days, before reaching the pinnacle of our criminal careers as top London gangsters. Life wasn't all about work. In our spare time, we'd hang about with lads of our own age in what could loosely be called a gang. One of the places we enjoyed frequenting was a local theatre, the Hackney Empire. The names of those who performed on the bill will mean nothing to young people today, but they were some of the greatest names in the business. George Formby and his ukulele, Issy Brown, the Jewish singer, and the hilarious Arthur Lucan, who dressed up as old Mother Riley and did an act with Kitty, who was supposed to be her daughter on stage, but was, in fact, his wife. We'd watch these acts from way up in the gods, which is what the cheapest seats in the upper balconies were known as, but at the same time we'd be scanning the theatre for rivals. For being young bloods, there was always friction with other gangs, as each juggled for the position of superiority. One night I spotted a young gang leader by the name of Lamb. For some time, this fella had been shooting his mouth off about what he'd do if he got hold of me. I wasn't that hard to find if he was so keen to mix it as he said he was, but he'd never sought me out. Now it would be the other way round. I kept my eyes on him, and when he went to the toilets, I slipped out of my seat and followed him. As I walked in and shut the door behind me, he looked round, and I struck him across the face with a length of bicycle chain. His nose and mouth burst open, and he fell down amongst the piss and dog ends, screaming his head off. I calmly pocketed the chain, joined the others, and we left the theatre, leaving behind another brick for the wall of reputation that was building around us as young villains. We had well-earned reputations as boxers, which had been established since we were 12, but over a period of time, we found we were gaining a certain notoriety due to our street-fighting prowess. In a way, we were forced to perpetuate the growing myth, as certain individuals and many gangs sought us out in their efforts to enhance their own reputations as those who had sorted out those Kray twins. We had fights wherever we went, and in consequence, found we were barred from dance halls and cinemas all over the East End and North London. I remember going to the Rex Cinema in Bethnal Green. The manager, done up in his penguin suit, was standing just inside the foyer vetting the customers. When he saw us, he said, "I don't want you lot in here causing trouble." So Ron hit him full on the chin and sent him sprawling. Though we didn't intentionally look for trouble, it seemed to come looking for us. Invariably, the odds seemed stacked against us, but without false modesty, I can honestly say that when Ron and myself were shoulder to shoulder, we were a match for half a dozen of our opponents. On one such occasion, we were in the Coach and Horses with our friend Pat Butler, the fella that used to go to Wisbech with us, when we were spotted by a nine-handed little mob at the other end of the pub. Pat is no fighter, and I knew something was coming up, so I told him to fuck off quick. I had a quick word with Ron, then ran out of the door as though I was scared, leaving him behind. Just as I'd guessed, half of them came charging after me. I ran up the road, dodged down a couple of alleyways, and came back into the pub just in time to see Ron smash a chair over the head of one of the young blokes. There was 5 of them, 1 down, 2 each left. Ron in front, me behind. They'd nowhere to go except on the floor, and we just put them there when the other 4 burst back in. Tables went over, glasses were smashed, but between us, we hammered the lot of them. There was blood everywhere. None of ours, and most of it from the bloke who'd been done with the chair. But they'd started it, so we just walked away and never gave them another thought. Caught unawares, we weren't tooled up that night, but normally if we felt we were going into a potentially violent situation, we'd sort out something from under our bed in Valence Road. The collection of weapons we had was large enough to cope with anything short of a war. Before we went to a dance or whatever, we'd tell the rest of the gang to come up to the bedroom and sort something out for themselves. The choice included knuckle dusters, Bowie knives, koshes, Gurkha knives, cutthroat razors, and even sharper than razors, a surgeon's scalpel. If we needed to improvise, a lethal and not too obvious kosh could be made by putting a spanner inside a tie, knotting the bottom, and then tucking it into the trousers. More than once I went out with a sword down my trousers. Walking with a slight limp was no problem, but being unable to bend my leg getting on the bus to go to the Royal in Tottenham was very awkward. Every area had its own gang, and where there were leaders like John Nash, Ronnie Diamond and Tony Pachita, there would be followers aligning themselves with ferocious loyalty under the banner of the leader's name. We had no quarrel with the Nash gang, in fact. We were quite friendly with them. Even today, I classed John as a good friend. With some of the others, we had an uneasy truce. In the main, confrontation with most meant an explosion of violence. A dice game in the toilet area of Shoreditch Town Hall ended in a battle. When we found some cheating was going on, our gang pulled out concealed weapons and done the lot of them. The same happened when we got into an argument with Tony Pachita and his gang at a North London coffee stall. He was part Italian and a bit flash, but once we'd gone through the lot of them, they weren't feeling so clever. Our reputation was so great that even when we were on our own, the other side still felt they needed to be mob-handed. Their fears were justified, as the Watney Street gang found when they waylaid Ron and me as we came out of a cafe in Commercial Road. We were surrounded by 10 of these so-called tough guys. A mistake too many of these people make is thinking that a fight needs a bit of verbal pushing and shoving before the action. Not Ron and me. Before any of them knew what was happening, we'd reduced the odds down to 3-1. 4 of them reduced the odds even more when they ran away, leaving their mates to take a good beating. We spilt a lot of blood in those days, but the sight of it never had the slightest effect on us. One of the reasons may have been that from when we were young children, we had witnessed almost weekly the sight of badly injured people. We lived at the junction of Valence Road and Dunbridge Street, and it was notorious as an accident black spot. Cars, lorries and motorbikes, ignoring the junction or not being aware of it until too late, would speed across Valence Road, resulting in some horrifying pile-ups. Every crash of metal on metal would bring us running with the morbid curiosity of the young. It might have been upsetting at first, but after a while we became quite immune to the sight of blood and smashed bodies. Family, neighbours, and in particular, Grandad Lee clamoured for something to be done and regularly petitioned the council. Grandad never had a day's schooling in his life, but he could write a good letter. But nothing was done. Soaking up the outrage of the adults, we came to the conclusion that people were being hurt and killed because of the indifference of the authorities, so an unconscious rift was formed between us and the powers that be. You may be forgiven for thinking that the violence I am describing was both gratuitous and unnecessarily bloody, and with the wisdom of hindsight, I have to agree that perhaps it was, but those were the times we lived in. Sometimes violence is the only thing that some people understand. Being pulled up in front of the law and being given a few months inside does not always fit the crime in my book. An example is of one time while walking back from the club, I came across an old woman standing on her doorstep wringing her hands, looking this way and that. I naturally stopped and inquired what was troubling her, and it turned out that while she'd been shopping, someone had entered her house and stolen a number of things, some of which were of great sentimental value. She knew who I was, and I told her not to worry, I would see what I could do to help. Now, there was not much that could be kept secret in the local area, and so it was not difficult to find out who had been up to what. I put the word out, and within hours had the name of the low-life youth who had robbed the old lady. I had him picked up and said that I wanted the stolen property brought with him. This was duly done. I had him taken to the old woman's house, where he not only handed back the goods, but apologized and paid her some compensation. If he thought that that was all it took to reconcile his crime, he had another thought coming. From there, he was taken to the scrapyard by the club, given a severe beating, and then every finger on both hands was broken with an iron bar. It would be a long time before he was able to put his hands on other people's property, and it would send out a message to those considering the same thing. I have often heard it said that if Ronnie and I were still in the East End, the crime figures would be drastically cut. That in itself is a compliment, though I have to say, again from what I hear, that due to the high incidence of drug taking and the rise of foreign gangs willing to kill for a wrong look, our own form of justice would be somewhat outdated. However, sometimes our instinct to fight first, ask questions later, backfired on us. One evening, Ronnie had been in Pelici's cafe on the Roman road with a few friends. They left and were standing outside the cafe talking and idly kicking at the slush on the pavement when Ronnie was grabbed by the arm from behind. Instinctively, he swung round and threw a punch at whoever had grabbed him. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a copper who, reeling back from the blow that had caught him on the shoulder, slipped on the icy pavement and sprawled full length on the ground. Ronnie helped him to his feet, but he was already calling for backup. A police van arrived and Ronnie was kicked and punched into the back of it. The law doesn't like it when one of their own is assaulted. We heard that he'd been arrested later that evening, so me, Charlie, and the old man, keeping his head well down, went to the station and demanded to see him. I couldn't believe my eyes when I caught sight of him. He had a lump the size of a golf ball on his forehead. His face was cut and bloody, and his clothes were torn. He looked like he'd been in a road accident. He told us that at PC Bainton, the copper he'd knocked down had been the instigator of the beating he'd received in the cell. There was nothing we could do at that stage to get Ron released, so we left. But as we walked up the road, PC Bainton, whom I knew, was walking towards us. I stepped in front of him and told him that I'd fucking well have him for what he'd done to my brother. He sneered at me and said, "Just you try it and you'll get the same," then turned away. I was in a rage at Ronnie's treatment, so, without even considering the consequences, let fly a flurry of punches to his head, and leaving him holding his face, walked away. An hour later, I was arrested at home and taken to join Ronnie. Mum was crying and Dad was doing his nut, but being on the run himself, he couldn't strong it too much in case the law decided to dig out his file and lift him as well. After a brief appearance at Old Street, we found ourselves in a police van bound for remand in Wormwood Scrubs. We'd heard a whisper that if we kept quiet about the brutal beating Ron had received, we could most probably get away with probation. So, banking on the law, keeping their side of the bargain, I wasn't too worried about the result. This allowed me to feel a lot of sympathy for the kids on the Borstal wing who had already been sentenced and were waiting for their allocation. I'd lie on my bed and listen to these kids calling to each other in loud whispers from the tiny cell windows. "What you get? 3 years. What about you? 9 months, lucky bastard. Got any snout? Tommy's off to Hollesley Bay tomorrow. That fat screw's a right fucker." The lights in the cells were switched off at 9 o'clock, but still the talking would go on far into the night. From the remand wing around me, I'd hear muffled sobs as the dark hours cracked the veneer of daytime toughness, and young villains cried for their mothers. Even though it's well over 40 years ago, I can still picture the faces of those Borstal and remand boys I was banged up with, and wonder what became of them all. As young as I was, with no conception of what the future held, I had a deep conviction that this would not be my last time behind the door. When we eventually got to court, PC Bainton stood up and said in our defense that perhaps his overreaction to the incident had caused the situation to get out of hand, and the assault was not quite as serious as it seemed. Absolute bollocks. but then he was under instruction to play it down in case the far more serious implication of police brutality came out in court. On top of his testimony came that of our friend, the well-respected vicar, Father Hetherington. We had known him for many years and had often helped him to run bazaars and fetes at his Church of St. James in Bethnal Green. He tried everything he could think of to try and get us to attend church services, but in the end gave up gracefully and just accepted the help we offered. Although he told the judge that he deplored our conduct, he also pointed out that basically we were honest lads who went out of our way to help others, particularly the elderly. Unlike the copper who said what he did without believing a word of it, Father Hetherington genuinely felt that what he was saying was the truth. And in a way, it was, as far as he was concerned. The only trouble was Ron and I lived two different lives. One the father saw, and one he was not aware of. At the end of the day, we got a probation order against us, which meant we were free to leave the court. Although reporting every week to the probation officer would be a nuisance, I think we were both pleased to get a result better than we could have hoped for. With that bit of aggravation out of the way, Brother Charlie felt that if we went to work with him, he could keep his eye on us and hopefully prevent us getting into any further trouble. So we became wardrobe dealers for a while, but still managed to find a bit of trouble. We'd gone out to Chelmsford and spent the morning dropping flyers through letterboxes which said we'd call back in a couple of hours. We were just finished and were thinking of finding a cafe for a cup of tea when a black van pulled up beside us and a tall fellow of about 30 jumped out. He came up to me swearing and cursing. "You ain't fucking buying round here. This is my patch, so clear off." I didn't argue, just swung a left hook to his chin and knocked him clean through a privet hedge. Funny thing was, all that could be seen was a large hole in the hedge with a pair of boots sticking out of it. After a spot of lunch, we went back on the round and never saw anything of him. Next time, it was Charlie's turn, and he was supposed to be keeping us out of fights. We were working in the area of Eastcoats and had bought a fair amount of clothes, so each of us was carrying large black bags on our shoulders. As we passed a crew of workmen digging up the road, one of them shouted, "Are you ladies taking your washing to the laundry?" He was about the same age as Charlie, very thick set and stripped to the waist, and we could see he was covered in tattoos. Me and Ron were going to steam into him, but Charlie told us that he would handle it. He went up to the fella and said, "You got a lot of mouth, let's see if you got as much bottle." The young bloke took up the challenge, but as he squared up, Charlie knocked him to the ground. He scrambled up and was punched down again. Give him his due, he was game, but no match for our brother. In fact, so quickly was he put down each time, he never returned a single blow. We kept the rest of the workmen back in case they had ideas about helping their mate out, but it was soon over. Bruised and bleeding, the fella put his hands up to show he'd had enough. So without a word, Charlie put his jacket back on and we walked away. For 9 months or so, we stuck it out, though more for Charlie's sake than our own. We were making a few quid, but our hearts were just not in the clothes business, which was a bit of a blow to the old man, who had started to think that all his sons would carry on the family tradition. As it turned out, if we'd waited a few weeks before jacking it in, the decision would have been made for us anyway, as through the door came 2 buff envelopes ordering us to report for our national service. Friends, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you again in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.